In the late 19th century, Africa was caught in what historians call the scramble for Africa. European powers divided the continent among themselves, claiming territories and turning them into colonies. Britain, France, Portugal, and Belgium were taking large portions of land. Among these powers was also Italy, a new nation in Europe, eager to prove itself by building an empire. Italy's eyes turned toward the Horn of Africa, a region that included present-day Eritrea and Ethiopia. Italy had already established a foothold in Eritrea by the 1880s, but it wanted more. To the Italians, Ethiopia looked like the perfect target. It was a large country with rich resources and a history of kingship, but Europeans often described it as backward and divided. Italy believed it could easily conquer Ethiopia and claim glory among other European nations. But Ethiopia was not like other African states that had fallen quickly to colonial powers. Ethiopia had a long history as one of the world's oldest kingdoms, tracing its roots back to the Aksumite Empire and Christianity's early days. Its people were proud, and its rulers were determined to defend their independence. At the center of this resistance was Emperor Menelik II, who came to power in 1889. Menelik was a strong, intelligent, and ambitious leader. He wanted to modernize Ethiopia by introducing new weapons, building roads, and expanding trade. But above all, he wanted to keep Ethiopia free from foreign domination. The spark of conflict came with the Treaty of Betul, signed between Italy and Ethiopia in 1889. The treaty was supposed to be an agreement of friendship and cooperation. But there was a trick hidden in the wording. In the Amharic version, the treaty said Ethiopia could use Italy to represent it in international affairs if it wished. But in the Italian version, it said Ethiopia was obliged to use Italy as its representative, effectively making Ethiopia a protectorate of Italy. When Menelik II discovered this deception, he rejected the treaty. Italy, however, claimed Ethiopia as its colony and prepared for war. This misunderstanding quickly grew into a full-blown conflict. Menelik II began to gather his forces. He sent messages across his empire, calling on local rulers, nobles, and warriors to join him in defending Ethiopia's freedom. From the highlands and valleys, from villages and towns, men responded. By 1895, Menelik had assembled a massive army, perhaps over 100,000 soldiers, one of the largest African armies ever seen at the time. What made this army powerful was not just its size, but also its weapons. Menelik had been wise enough to buy modern rifles, cannons, and ammunition from France and Russia, playing European rivalries to Ethiopia's advantage. Unlike many African armies that faced colonial powers with spears and arrows, Ethiopia marched into battle armed with modern guns and artillery. On the Italian side, General Berthieri led around 17,000 troops. They were trained, disciplined, and confident. The Italians believed that their European weapons and organization would give them an easy victory, even though they were heavily outnumbered. They underestimated both Ethiopia's determination and Menelik's leadership. By early 1896, the stage was set. Italy advanced into Ethiopia, aiming to crush Menelik's forces and enforce colonial rule. Menelik, joined by his wife Empress Taytu Betul, mobilized his generals, including Ras Alula, Ras Makanan, and Ras Mikhail, to prepare for a decisive confrontation. The armies marched toward the rugged northern region of Ethiopia, near the town of Adwa. The land was mountainous, with steep valleys and narrow passes. Terrain familiar to Ethiopian fighters, but difficult for the Italians. Both sides understood that the coming battle would decide Ethiopia's fate. If Ethiopia lost, it would become another colony under European control. But if Ethiopia won, it would send a powerful message to Africa and the world that colonialism could be resisted. The drums of war echoed across the highlands as warriors gathered in their thousands, carrying rifles, shields, and flags of the cross. In March 1896, the two armies finally came face to face near Adwa, ready for a battle that would change history. On the morning of March 1, 1896, the quiet valleys and rugged mountains around the town of Adwa came alive with the sounds of war. Italy's army, under General Berthieri, had marched deep into Ethiopian territory, hoping to surprise Menelik II's massive army. But what the Italians did not know was that Ethiopia was more prepared than they imagined. The Italian army was about 17,000 strong, including Italian soldiers and African Askari colonial troops from Eritrea. They had modern rifles, artillery, and believed they were disciplined enough to defeat a larger, less organized enemy. Yet, they faced a much bigger Ethiopian force of 80,000 to 100,000 warriors. These men had answered Menelik's call from every corner of the empire. The Ethiopian army was not only large, but also well armed with rifles and artillery purchased from Europe. General Berthieri divided his army into four columns. planning to attack the Ethiopians from different directions. But this decision would prove to be a mistake. The rugged terrain of Adwa's mountains made it difficult for the Italians to communicate and coordinate their movements. Instead of striking together, the Italian columns became separated and vulnerable. At dawn, Ethiopian scouts discovered the Italian positions. Menelik's generals quickly moved their forces into place. The battle began with fierce clashes as Ethiopian warriors stormed the Italian positions with a mixture of gunfire, spears, and sheer numbers. The Italians soon realized they were heavily outnumbered and trapped. On one front, Ras Alula Angeda led his forces against the Italians with relentless attacks. On another, Ras Makhonnen, father of future Emperor Haile Selassie, pushed his men forward with discipline and courage. Ras Mikhail and his Oromo fighters attacked from yet another side, striking hard at the weakened Italian columns. But one of the most remarkable figures on the battlefield was Empress Taytu Betul, the wife of Menelik II. She commanded thousands of troops and organized the supply of water and ammunition for the soldiers. Her leadership inspired the men and reminded them that the fight was not only for their emperor, but for Ethiopia's survival and dignity. As the day went on, the Italians were overwhelmed. Their soldiers fought bravely, but they were surrounded on all sides. Ethiopian gunfire rained down from the hills, while wave after wave of warriors charged with spears and swords. The Italian artillery was quickly captured or silenced, and panic spread through their ranks. By midday, the battle had turned into a disaster for Italy. Thousands of their soldiers lay dead on the field. Others fled in retreat, only to be hunted down by Ethiopian fighters, who knew the terrain far better. General Baratieri himself barely escaped, retreating with the shattered remnants of his army back to Eritrea. The victory was total. Ethiopia had destroyed an entire modern European army in open battle. It was a rare and shocking outcome in the age of colonial conquest. At a time when European nations were carving up Africa, Ethiopia had stood its ground and defeated one of them. The cost of victory was not light. Ethiopia lost thousands of men in the fierce fighting, but their sacrifice had saved their nation's independence. For the Italians, the defeat was humiliating. More than 6,000 Italian soldiers were killed, thousands were wounded, and many were taken prisoner. For a young European power like Italy, the loss at Adwa was a national disgrace. News of the battle spread quickly around the world. In Europe, it shocked governments and military leaders who had assumed that no African army could defeat a modern European force. In Africa and the African diaspora, it became a symbol of hope and pride. Ethiopia had proven that colonialism could be resisted and that Africans could defend their freedom. The Battle of Adwa was not just a military victory. It was a turning point in history, a clash that carried deep political and cultural meaning. But what happened after the battle would be just as important, as Ethiopia's triumph forced Italy to accept defeat and reshape the way the world saw Africa. When the smoke of battle cleared on March 1, 1896, the hills of Adwa carried the memory of a victory that would echo across the world. Ethiopia had not only defended its independence, but had also humiliated a European colonial power. The aftermath of Adwa was both immediate and long-lasting. For Italy, the defeat was catastrophic. News of the disaster spread across Europe, and in Italy, it caused outrage and political crisis. The Italian government fell shortly after, and Prime Minister Francesco Crispi resigned in disgrace. Italy had dreamed of building an empire in East Africa, but instead, it faced national embarrassment. The soldiers captured by Ethiopia were later released, but only after Italy agreed to peace talks. Those talks led to the Treaty of Addis Ababa, signed in October 1896. In this treaty, Italy formally recognized Ethiopia's full independence and sovereignty. This was extraordinary at a time when nearly all of Africa was being partitioned and colonized. Ethiopia stood alone as the only African nation, alongside Liberia, that remained free from colonial rule. For Ethiopia, the victory brought unity and pride. Emperor Menelik II emerged as one of the most respected leaders in Africa. His success was not only due to bravery on the battlefield, but also to his diplomatic skill in securing weapons and balancing relations with European powers. His wife, Empress Taytu Betul, was equally celebrated for her courage and leadership during the war. Together, they became symbols of resistance and independence. But Adwa's impact went far beyond Ethiopia. Across Africa, news of the victory spread quickly. For people living under colonial rule, Ethiopia became a beacon of hope. It showed that European armies were not invincible and that Africans could fight back. In West Africa, South Africa, and beyond, the story of Adwa inspired resistance movements and gave courage to those who dreamed of freedom. The impact was also felt in the African diaspora. In the Caribbean, the United States, and Europe, black communities celebrated Ethiopia's triumph.